When will the current preaching work end? This question is addressed in the latest Watchtower magazine of Jehovah's Witnesses. Many Jehovah's Witnesses have asked this question. So what is the correct answer from the Bible? The simplest and clearest answer to this is found in Matthew chapter 24 verse 14. There Jesus Christ says, "This good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." But why then do many Jehovah's Witnesses ask this question? When will the current preaching work end? From my experience as a Jehovah's Witness, I can say that I didn't enjoy preaching when there were very few interested people. It was frustrating to approach people when almost no one wanted to listen. I really began to doubt whether there was any point in trying to preach in areas we had already covered. At that time, I had served as a so-called pioneer of Jehovah's Witnesses for about 2 years. I couldn't take it anymore that I couldn't find interested ones because we had already covered those areas dozens of times. So I began planning to go somewhere where we hadn't yet looked for interested ones. I started studying Russian, and within a year, I went at my own expense to the former Soviet Republic of Latvia in 1994. The Watchtower organization suggested that I go to a city called Valmiera. There was still only a Russian-speaking group of Jehovah's Witnesses there, and the city had untouched areas. Back then, in every apartment building where we hadn't been before, we found people who wanted to study the Bible. Then the preaching work felt purposeful. But after we had gone through all the houses and apartments in the city, we hardly found any interested ones anymore. When we went through the areas for the second time, I felt foolish. People already knew about us, and as a result, they rejected us very quickly. The second time around, they were no longer curious to hear what we had to offer. So the first time in an untouched area felt really purposeful, but the second time it felt really pointless. If only I had listened to Jesus and his instructions about how to do the preaching work then. He indeed said that when preaching, you go through a city and thus find the worthy ones and leave others in peace. In Matthew chapter 10, he gave clear instructions. In verses 14 and 15 it reads, "Wherever anyone does not receive you or listen to your words, on going out of that house or that city, shake the dust off your feet. Truly I say to you, it will be more endurable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than for that city." Doesn't this sound like those who reject the message don't need a second visit because Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, it will be more endurable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than for that city"? So doesn't Jesus here already indicate that those who don't accept the good news on the first time are already condemned to the resurrection of judgment? And doesn't Jesus here already indicate that they will answer for not accepting the message of good news right the first time it was offered to them? That's why it feels so pointless to repeatedly preach in areas where preaching has already been done. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses hope that preaching would soon end. They don't understand that they could already now stop preaching where they have already been. That's what Jesus Christ taught. We shouldn't make it more complicated than that. But this doesn't mean in any way that we stop worshiping God and furthering His will, because there are other ways to do that. For example, the Apostle Paul advised what young widows should do. He wrote, "Therefore I desire the younger widows to marry, to bear children, to manage a household, to give no opportunity to the opposer to criticize." So why did the Apostle Paul advise this, when he could have encouraged them to dedicate their lives to preaching? It was because he was realistic. He knew that generally there wasn't much more to do for God's kingdom in areas where preaching had already been done. He himself also avoided such areas. So realistically, there were no other ways to make disciples than to have children and teach them to become followers of Jesus. But some could be missionaries and go to more distant areas where preaching hadn't been done, and others could then support them materially. So in places where preaching has already been done, it's not worth trying hard to preach. Occasionally people around us might ask about our beliefs, and then it would be right to tell them. But most often it doesn't lead to them becoming disciples of Jesus. Most often they ask just out of curiosity. So the right answer to the question, "When will the current preaching work end?" is still the same, Matthew 24 and 14, which read, "This good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." But if we want to know more precisely when that will happen, we should study which end-time prophecies haven't yet been fulfilled and how they will be fulfilled. There is still much to learn for Jehovah's Witnesses here. Then we can get a clearer understanding of how much time is left until God's kingdom comes. Thanks for watching and see you next time.